This is a recorded lecture for our Chapter 2 or Module 2. This is focused more on the moral agent. The moral agent whose capacity is first to sense that right and wrong exists. Second, that we can know what is right from wrong. And third, that we know why something is right or wrong. So a moral agent is very important because of these capacities. A moral agent is the only creature so far who senses, who recognizes that rightness and wrongness exists. That we can know what is right from wrong, and that we can recognize and appreciate and rationalize and understand why something is right or wrong. If you remember these three important capacities, this actually point to first, that right or wrong exist, metaphysics. We can know what is right or wrong, epistemology. And we can know why something is right or wrong, ethics. So this is the importance of chapter 2 and why we need to understand chapter 2. I said moral agents refer to so far human beings because at present only human beings are considered fully ethical agents. But I say so far because we have current issues regarding whether there are other moral agents out there. One example would be AMAs or artificial moral agents. Well, that's another topic in ethics, no, that is far from our discussion, but it is sufficient to mention that sometimes, considering artificial intelligence, we are also considering questions regarding implementing moral properties in our machines. But so far in our lesson, in our chapter 2, we will focus more on what a moral agent is, what its nature, and why is it a special concern to distinguish right from wrong. So in the first pages of your chapter 2, you will find this, an introductory discussion to what chapter 2 is. Chapter 2 is composed of 3 lessons. Lesson 4, Lesson 5, and Lesson 6. Lesson 4 will be about the reality of cultural and ethical relativism that surround the moral agent. This is important for you to see how your environmental factors, biological factors, cultural, social factors can actually influence the way you understand what is right from wrong. From there, we go to lesson 5 and talk about the nature of moral persons as moral agent and moral patient. Here, we will understand various theories of personhood as well. And we will clarify here what a moral person really is. And lastly, we will examine the moral character and the competing views on whether character consists in being a good person or in good deeds. And here, we will use specifically Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development to understand how a moral agent develops in his or her morality. we start with lesson 4, ethical relativism. Here is an overview of lesson 4 and how it relates to lessons 1 to 3 in chapter 1. Remember that in lesson 2, you learned that we have acquired various standards that became our morality later on. You also learned that this came from various sources like your cultural etiquette, religion, and laws. In lesson 4, we will explore here more deeply our individual uniqueness by going deeper into what actually influences our morality. So you will be introduced to arguments that support individual differences and as well arguments against it. Here we will talk about relativism in morality. If you go back in lesson 3, remember that we discussed here how ethics differ from morality. We defined ethics as the philosophy of morals. And I hope you didn't forget how we defined morality and ethics back then, especially the 4 conditions when we say something is an ethical standard. That means first, something is an ethical standard if it has something to do with something that can potentially harm or benefit another. Second, universal validity. Third, overriding value over other values out there. And the source is adequacy of reason. In this lesson 4, therefore, you will be introduced to this philosophical process wherein gagamitin ninyo ang adequacy of reason para malaman kung alin ang mas reasonable. Arguments for cultural relativism or arguments against it. So let's go to the discussion proper. In this page 6, you'll see some glossary that can help you understand the discussion. Let's start with an anecdote regarding King Darius of Persia as recounted by Herodotus. King Darius experimented on 2 peoples under or within his empire, the Chaldaeans and the Greeks, with regard to their burial and funeral customs. The Chaldaeans customarily ate the bodies of their dead fathers. The Greeks, however, cremate or burn their dead on the funeral pyre. So here, King Darius asked the Greeks what they would take in exchange for eating the bodies of their dead, and asked the same thing from the Chaldaeans, what they would take in exchange for cremating their dead instead. Imagine that they could have asked freedom from Persia. But both the Greeks and the Chaldaeans were horrified at the prospect and they refused to take any. So this is an example of 2 different peoples and cultures having different moral codes. If I would ask you, which would you rather do? You would openly say, cremate, no? Bakit? Kasi sanay na tayo sa cremation. You are born in a time when cremation is considered normal. But if you happen to be born in medieval Europe, you might not want cremation as well. In medieval Europe, cremation was considered wrong because it was tantamount to destroying the body and thus denying the body resurrection. Remember, our faith tells us, the scriptures tell us or assure us that after we die, our bodies will be resurrected and be one with our souls again, because Christ would resurrect the dead and then life everlasting after. So, if you burn the body, ibig sabihin nito, you are now denying the body resurrection. Kaya ito bawal nung panahon na yan. Well, at present, tanggap na to ng mga Kristiyano because we now have another interpretation that the resurrection, however, would grant us a glorious body as Christ have shown us in His resurrection. Pero nung medieval times, ang alam nila, yung katawan kung saan namatay ka, yun na rin yung katawan kung saan magre-resurrect ka. Kaya hindi ito tama noon. That's another example na nagpapakita na we are products, our beliefs are products of our time. You might be shocked as well to know of this people called the Eskimos. They were discovered in the fringes of North America and Greenland in the 20th century, and they have different culture compared to ours. And these are some of the cultural practices that shocked those who discovered them at that time. First, men can have more than one wife. Ito, medyo normal lang. Sasabihin yung, may mga ganitong tao, may mga ganitong kultura. Okay. Pero look further. They can share their wives to their guests overnight as a sign of hospitality. So, I can imagine your reaction right now at the prospect of being a wife whose job is to entertain your husband's guest if you are an Eskimo. But you are reacting that way because in the first place, you are not an Eskimo. And you are an Ilocano, a Filipino, having different hospitality beliefs. Trying to understand this from or in the light of your own culture. But granted that you were born in Northern America or in Greenland, there is nothing wrong with this because ganun talaga ang nakalakihan nila at nakagisnan. The dominant male can also demand regular sexual access to their others men's wives. May alpha male, and women are also free to break their relationships and join another man if their husbands don't make trouble. The Eskimos also practice infanticide na they have the right to kill their babies at birth if they want. Not only this, they also practice euthanasia. Old members who are weak and feeble, who can no longer contribute sa club, are left out on the snow to die. Okay. I can only guess the reasons for this, but I am not claiming that these are the main reasons, but reflecting on the scarce resources available in those areas, filled with vast expanses of ice, this could be survivability. This could be survivability. And we did not go too far to understand this. In the Philippines lang, ang dami ng kultura. Kahit hindi mo na idamay ang Visayas at saka Mindanao, kahit Luzon lang, ang dami ng kaibahan ng ating mga kultura. Kahit nga Northern Luzon lang, pabayaan mo na yung Central Luzon at saka Southern Luzon, ang dami ng differences sa ating mga kultura. Okay? When I was still a seminarian and we were having our rural immersion, we were invited at a dinner one time doon sa mountainous highlands ng Kalinga. And sabi nung matanda, dinner kayo dito sa amin, frater, pero anusan yun, iti tinola ket nangina ti sardinas. Yun yung sabi, Tagalog, pagpasensyahan nyo na yung tinola na ihahanda namin dahil mahal ang sardinas. Isipin ninyo, dito sa atin, sa Ilocos, ang pagpapasensyahan natin minsan ay yung sardinas kasi wala tayong pambili ng tinola. But imagine, baliktad doon. Not because they are insulting us, but because ang dami kasi nilang manok doon. Free range. At anything na mabibili ng pera ay expensive sa kanila. No? Kaya, pag gumamit sila ng pera, special na yon. So there was a time na we were invited in one village kasi they would celebrate the priest's birthday there. I joined imagining that it's my chance to experience exotic food. Alam nyo ba yung ano ang nakahanda? 90% ng handa ay delata, maling, sausage, noodles, no? So sabi ko sa pare, Father, ba't ganito? Ba't ganito yung handa? And the priest told me, ganito frater, kasi pag binili nila yan, special sa kanila yan. Okay? Ganun yung paliwanag sa akin. So talagang magkakaiba tayo ng mindset, magkakaiba tayo ng way at looking at value, no, as different peoples. Okay. So ano ito? Well, this is now what we call cultural differences. Okay? Let's now understand what ethical relativism is from those examples that we had earlier. Recall in lesson 2 that personal morality is acquired from various sources and factors. So, magkakaiba tayo ng value judgments at moral standards kasi magkakaiba yung ating pinanggalingang konteksto. Sa lesson 3 naman, dinifferentiate natin ang morality sa ethics at doon nyo naintindihan na kailangan natin ng moral principles na universally valid for all, that can prevail over other values, based on the adequacy of reason that supports them. Kaya sabi natin, ethics is the philosophical discipline that can achieve that. And through ethics, we can have objective moral standards that can be universal principles that can apply to all people regardless of our differences. Yan ang project ng ethics. No? Yan ang project ng ethics. Let me elaborate what objective moral standards mean. Yung term na objective, ang root word niyan ay object. Ano ba ang object? Pag sinabi mong object, you are referring to something that exists outside your mind and beyond the controls of your imaginations. Hindi ang mga object sa labas ng ating isipan ay hindi produkto ng ating imahinasyon. Ang kanilang pag-iral, ang kanilang existence ay hindi nakasalalay sa ating preference, wish, or kung anuman. So, ibig sabihin, kung naiwan mo yung notebook mo na object na nag-exist at umiiral, hiwalay sa iyo sa classroom, pagbalik mo kinaumagahan, nandun pa rin yun. Hindi siya magdi-disappear dahil ang kanyang pag-iral, ang kanyang existence ay hindi nakasalalay sa preference isipan mo. Yun ang objective. So yun ang proyekto ng ating ethics, no? Na identify moral standards that are objective. Hindi produkto ng imahinasyon. Hindi produkto ng choice at consensus ng mga taong naniniwala dito. Na regardless of the people's background or differences, there are principles that stand true for them all. Okay? Yun yung produkto ng ethics discussion natin sa lesson 3. So if I'll illustrate that, let me remove this na. Ang ethics ay parang common denominator. Okay? Through what? Reason. Adequacy of reason. So kung magkakaibang tao tayo, nevertheless, if we use our reason, we will understand as our common denominator na eto talaga yung mga tamang prinsipyo. Kaya ito ngayon ay universal, objective principles. Kasi hindi ito nakasalalay sa kung sino ka at kung ano ka. kundi dahil may reason ka at yun ang common denominator nating lahat despite our differences, hindi mo pwedeng i-deny na ito ang mga tinatawag nating fundamental, moral, ethical principles. Kaya nga universal application. Dahil applicable to all, umanamong tay amin nga agpayso daytoy. Naniniwala at naiintindihan natin kung ginagamit lamang natin ang ating rason na tama talaga ito. Kaya tinawag siyang objective kasi hindi ito base sa ating prejudice at bias o isipan, kundi they stand true to all regardless of our whims and biases and prejudices, wants and needs. Okay. Now, the consequence, however, is if cultural relativism is true, then universal valid moral standards that are true for all now is actually undermined. Bakit? Kung totoo ang cultural relativism, culturally bound lahat ng standards. So let me illustrate it this way. Let's say person 1 belongs to culture 1, person 2 belongs to culture 2, person 3 belongs to culture 3, and person 4 belongs to culture 4. Imagine the circles that surround the individuals as culture. They are not the same. No? While individuals are culturally bound, they are not the same. They are not identical. No? This would mean that ethics, as thinking about morality, is somewhat impossible. If not impossible at all, is medyo hindi totoo yung notion natin na universal objective. Kasi culturally bound. Ganito yan, no? Morality, therefore, is not objective but relative to each culture. Kasi, if we are indeed culturally bound, hindi natin ito madi-deny, na-discuss na kanina na cultural differences are correct. We have to affirm from this level that cultural relativism is true. Anong evidence nyo? O yung pinag-usapan natin kanina. Galatians, Greeks, Eskimos, at different cultures ng ating mga Pilipino. Cultural relativism is true. The problem there is, if cultural relativism is true, it follows that morality is relative to that culture. Bakit? Kada kultura, merong silang sariling code. Anong code ito? Moral code. Every culture has their unique moral code. Na ganun din. The moral code ng yellow culture hindi pareho sa moral code ng green culture, likewise sa blue at likewise sa red culture. That means, from cultural relativism as true, it follows that meron din truthfulness ang ethical erase natin. Okay. May katotohanan din ang tinatawag na ethical relativism is true. If ethical relativism therefore is true, look at now what happens to this. The claim that reason has universal objective principles, it will already be inconsistent with each other. Okay? Yan ang mangyayari. So, going back, ang tawag dito ay cultural relativism. Ito siya, Ito, yung differences in culture. Now, without a universal standard for morality, there are no standards against which we can judge a cultural norm to be right or wrong. Cultural relativism argues that each culture has its own values, valid only for their people. So, itong moral code na yellow, okay, yan yung members nila sa isang kultura. So, imagine nyo, maraming tao dyan. The moral code in yellow culture is applicable only to them. The moral code sa green culture applicable only to them. Likewise sa blue and sa red culture. Tapos, you cannot declare that the morality of yellow culture is more than the green. Hindi pwedeng ganun. Kasi magkaiba nga. Ang punto lang dyan is, yung moral code ng yellow, nakadepende lang yan sa kultura ng yellow. At, applicable lang sa mga membro ng kulturang yan. You cannot even use it to criticize the other culture's belief systems kasi pareho lang kayong nanggaling sa sarili niyong kultura and you cannot use another culture to judge the other. As a consequence, morality then is relative as well. Ito na. Okay. Meaning, what is right varies from one person to another, from one culture to another. Yan. Tinatawag yang ethical relativism. Okay. Why is this problematic? Ito nga. Diba sabi natin kanina, ethics tells us that there is universal objective principles. Ano ang mangyayari sa ethical relativism if that is true? If ethical relativism is true, that means morality is many. Ito, code number yellow, code ng green, moral code ng blue, moral code ng red. Many. Ang sabi ng ethics, universal, meaning one. Hindi na pareho, no? Relativism, sabi dito, objective. Pag sinabing relativism, nakadepende yan sa kung anong konteksto. Okay. Yung objective, regardless of context di ba? Yung relative, hindi. Depende yung sitwasyon. Depende kung sinong affected. Depende kung saan siya nanggaling. Ganun yung relativism. So, eto yung problema na binibigay ng cultural relativism sa ethics. Ang problem dito ay we cannot deny cultural relativism. Kasi it's true, there are lots of evidences. From this, it follows that there is ethical relativism. If there is ethical relativism, what happens to our claim in ethics na may universal objective principles? Okay. So ano to? Para siyang disjunction. Mamimili ka. Either you subscribe to ethical relativism or you accept universal objective principles ng ethics. Either way, you need to choose kasi hindi sila consistent. Ganun yung pagkaka-frame niyan. Okay. Now, before we examine this further, may ikatlo kasing possible na mangyari sa atin. Ethical subjectivism. Ano to? Morality varies from one person to another. Ganito yan. Eto ka, eto yung friend mong dalawa. At sabi mo, para sa akin, ganito. Pero para sa'yo, iba. Pero wala akong pakialam sa'yo, wala ka rin pakialam sa akin. Ang importante, yung okay sa akin. When you do that, this is called ethical subjectivism. Bakit? Root word, subject. Individual ang basis dito. Okay? Individual. How is it different from ethical relativism? At least sa ethical relativism, guys, is eto, no? At least sa isang kultura, shared and communal. sa ethical relativism at cultural relativism yan. Medyo pwede nating i-tolerate ito at respetuhin. No? Kasi at least maraming tao ang nagsusubscribe dito sa isang kultura. Pero ito kasi is individual ito. Okay? Medyo selfish, medyo solipsistic. Okay? Yan yung sa ethical subjectivism. Now, I don't think this is a good view, no? Itong ethical subjectivism. Kasi hindi ka magkakaroon ng ethical progress dito kung yung pinaniniwalaan mo lang tama at pinaglalaban mo ay yung sarili mong pananaw at yung sarili mong ikakabuti lamang. Okay? Ethics thrives on how you reason out and how you argue that something is right or wrong. That's how our ethical reasoning develops. Sa ethical subjectivism, no such development is possible. Kasi tela bagbagim ti patpatsem, yung sarili mo lang ang iniisip mong tama. Okay, ang mga further example dito, ito, no? Siguro na-encounter nyo to sa social media. No? One time, may nahuling nagnakaw. Tapos na-interview siya. Ito sa news ito, ha? Siguro you saw this, no? No? Sabi ng magnanakaw, bakit siya nagtakaw? Hindi daw kasi sinarado nung may-ari yung kanyang bahay nung umalis. Kaya daw siya na-tempt na pumasok at magnakaw. At nag-advise pa yung magnanakaw, sabi niya, we should all secure our homes before leaving so that burglars won't be tempted. Sabi pa niya, siya na yung nagbigay ng normative statement. Ito ang example ng individual person having his or her own interpretation of what is right or wrong, or simply ethical subjectivism. Bakit? May sarili siyang definisyon ng pagnanakaw. Okay? Para sa kanya, he was right in doing so because it is wrong for the owner to leave their properties unattended. So what is right of an individual is the right thing to do regardless whether it is not right for another. Ethical subjectivism. Meron pang isa yung gay, no? Although non-bearing yung kanyang gender dito, pero para madali niyo lang maalala if you saw it years ago sa SOCMED. Siya yung gay na nagnakaw ng cellphone, na nasa labas ng bahay yung phone. So sa kanya, hindi raw to pagnanakaw kasi ang definition ng pagnanakaw ay kinuha mo sa loob ng bahay ng may-ari. Now, ngayon, dahil yung phone ay nasa labas ng bahay, no, hindi daw to pagnanakaw kasi hindi na to nasa loob ng bahay ng may-ari. Okay, so I hope you don't agree to subjectivism. Kasi ito, wala tong patutunguhang argumentos at walang moral development dyan. Ang problematic talaga ay yung claim ng ethical relativism. Doon mo makikita yung banggaan ng dalawang to. No? Kung may ethical relativism, no, yung tama o mali is nakadepende sa konteksto, nakadepende sa tao, relativism. Paano na yung claim ng ethics na universal objective moral principles ang meron? Okay? So, that's the problem that cultural relativism, which is true, brings to ethics as the claim na may universal objective principles. Because if cultural relativism is true, then it follows that each culture has its own moral codes. Okay? Eto. And thus, that points to what? Ethical relativism as well. Okay? So, I'll end here. Our next lecture will be about the 3 arguments for and against cultural ethical relativism. You are encouraged to read what these arguments are to prepare yourself sa ating next na discussion. Okay? So, thank you. And here ends our introduction to Lesson 4.